So, of course, I want to start by saying thank you, everyone, for joining. My name is Cody Armstrong, and also on the line with me is Joe Dunn. Joe Dunn manages all of our partner applications. He manages our developer relations and is a great resource for answering any questions that you have regarding both render applications and partner applications in general. So, Joe's there to answer any questions that you have. I'm also available to answer any questions that you have. So, feel free to use that questions dialog in the GoToWebinar control panel to enter in any question that you'd like, and we'll do our best from time to time to stop to make sure all those questions are addressed. Now, the topic today, as you can see from the slide, is rendering applications for Onshape. So we're going to focus on just the available rendering applications that you can use to create really realistic renderings of your Onshape models. Now, this is just based off of a lot of questions that we get from our traditional webinars. How do I take my Onshape model that I've created and create a rendering of it? And we have a few different examples to show you, a few different apps that you can use in the App Store to create these. So we're going to go over all the various apps, some things that really set them apart, and things you should take a look at when you're considering rendering applications for Onshape. So let's jump into things. Now, real briefly here, the agenda. If you're not familiar with the Onshape App Store, the goal first today is to introduce you to the App Store. We're going to be focusing on just a few apps within it, in the rendering apps themselves, but the App Store itself, if you haven't looked at it, is a big list of available features that you can go in and create toolpath, run FEA studies, fluid dynamic studies. We have part libraries for nuts and bolts, for example. So a long list of apps that can help you get your job done quickly. Right? Whether it's design, whether you're running a stress analysis, you're running a render like we're talking about here today, there is an app available for you in the Onshape App Store. So I want to give you a brief introduction to the Onshape App Store, where you can find it, how you can take a look at apps, subscribe to them, and so on. Then I want to get into the various app types that we have available. There are 3 different app types. I'm going to go over the differences between them, and then get into the rendering apps specifically. And so we're going to go over, I have a slide just showing you briefly what each rendering app is, how it works, how it integrates with Onshape, and then I have a simple render example for you at the end using one of our integrated cloud apps. So real simple example, real short webinar for you today, just going to walk through all the various rendering options that you have available to you, and then walk through a simple example of one. So that is a rough agenda. Again, feel free to ask any questions as we're going through things. Now, the first question I often get asked, and this is for those new users out there, if you're new to Onshape, the question often comes up, well, I've built my model, I've built my part or assembly, and I'm ready to maybe have it manufactured, or I'm ready to have it rendered to put into marketing literature, for example. How do I render? How do I generate toolpath? How do I run a stress analysis on my Onshape data? And the answer is the Onshape App Store. We have 40 different apps available, and that list, that number will grow. And you'll see that we're frequently adding new partners, new apps to the App Store. Now, we're going to focus on a smaller subsection of that list of apps that is available, but just keep in mind, if you're looking for rendering, if you're looking for finite element analysis, fluid dynamics, CAM, parts libraries, if I need a nut and bolt library, for example, all of those are available as apps on the App Store, and all of them can make a big difference in how you currently get your job done. So definitely check out the Onshape App Store if you're looking for just about anything, post-processing with regards to your models. And the other thing I always like to point out about the App Store is all apps have some kind of a free offering. So they will all offer, maybe free trials or something to that effect. And the neat thing is a lot of them really follow Onshape's pricing model, where you pay for, what you use. So it's a bit of a different philosophy for some of these apps, but definitely very neat. So let's move on. Now, I mentioned before, what are the different app types? And I'm going to go into the App Store in just a second, but you'll see when I jump into the App Store, really 3 different types. And you'll see these 3 different icons indicating the different types. We have integrated cloud apps, which is what we're going to show you later on here today. It's an example where the cloud app, the application that you're running, is actually integrated into Onshape itself. It runs as a tab within the document. So much like another part, assembly or drawing, it's just another tab in your document. You click on it, and then you can render, or you can generate toolpaths. So Integrated cloud apps operate as just another tab within your document. There's no separate interface. They can be accessible, from any device. You don't have to worry about crashing or local files or any of those kinds of issues. All the same benefits that you get from a cloud-based CAD system, you also get in an integrated cloud app. Now, there are also connected cloud apps, and this allows the other cloud applications, for example, SimScale. It allows you to connect to another cloud-based system. And so this makes it easy if you have another cloud-based system to grab your Onshape documents, pull them into that cloud-based app, and then maybe run your structural analysis. So connected cloud apps connect to another cloud-based application, but make it easy to exchange data between them. Now, the last one on the list, and it's 3 of the apps that I'm going to show you here today, are connected desktop apps. And a connected desktop app is your more traditional installed application. So many of us have, a computer with traditional installed applications that we had to download and install. And the reason that this category is here is because it allows those installed applications to connect to Onshape's cloud services. And this means that you can continue using apps that you've been using potentially for a long time or that you prefer, and then connect to Onshape as if it were a local directory on your disk, right? So it connects as if it were local files when actually you're connecting to Onshape's cloud services. So connected desktop apps make it easy for installed apps to connect directly to Onshape, pull down your document, and do whatever it needs to, whether it's rendering, CAM, etc. So integrated cloud apps, again, integrated directly into Onshape. Connected cloud apps connect to other cloud-based services, and connected desktop apps are traditional installed applications that connect to Onshape. So those are the various app types. Now, the question inevitably comes up, well, how do I get to the App Store? How do I subscribe and start using apps? And the big thing that I want to point out is when you're in a document, let's jump around here to an assembly. Here I have an assembly up, and let's say, for instance, I wanted to render this assembly. How might I check out the various render apps? Or maybe I want to run a stress test on this assembly. How would I access the apps to do that? And so the important thing I want to point out is throughout the Documents page or any document that you have open, there's a big button in the top right corner for App Store. Okay, so I can click App Store, and of course, like the name implies, that takes me to the Onshape App Store. Now, there are a few things I want to point out about the App Store interface before I get into the specifics of rendering apps. One of the first is, of course, the filters on the left. So very much like the document list, where you have a filter list on the left, same goes for the Onshape App Store. You can filter by top rated, various app categories, right? And then apps that you've already subscribed to. Now, you can scroll through the list, you can filter, so I could select rendering, for example, and it makes it easy to pare this list down and find what I'm looking for. There is also an option for search, but a very basic interface, right? You can filter, you can search, but it's really just a matter of picking the app that you want. Now, in my case, I want to take a look at some rendering apps, so I'll left-click rendering. It will filter by just the rendering apps, and you'll see a few different apps in this list. Now, I mentioned before we have different app types, and you'll see a little icon in the top right indicating that app's type, whether it's an integrated cloud app, a connected desktop app, and then also we have, of course, cloud-connected apps. So you'll get a visual cue as to the app type. If you want more information on the apps, the individual apps themselves, you can left-click one of them, and you'll get a breakdown, screenshot indicating how it works, some details about the product, and then reviews, product screenshots, so as much detail as you'd want to really start to try things out. Now, keep in mind, many of these have some sort of a free offering, right? So you can subscribe for free, you can try it for free, some are just simple trials, and you'll have the option here. So let's jump back into rendering apps. And, the other thing I wanted to point out here is some of these, for instance, the connected desktop apps, are also free, and they have different plans available to them. So each app has its own, payment structure, and some are more traditional. You purchase the application like you would a traditional installed app, and some are pay-as-you-go, very much like Onshape itself, where you pay for what you use, or they have some sort of a professional version. But it's important to keep in mind, you'll see the details for the payment in each app here. And you'll see this has a free option as well as a pro and what's referred to as a mechanical option. Okay, so these are the various apps in the App Store. I wanted to point out, you have your filter options. If you're looking for cam, there's apps for cam. Simulation, if you're looking for apps for fluid dynamics or finite element analysis, there's these apps. So it really depends on what your goal is. My goal here today is to show you the various rendering apps that we have available. And we'll do webinars on other apps in the future, but I really want to focus on the apps that you can use today to render your Onshape models. And there are a few that I want to mention. I have a few slides with each one of them, but we have a good mix of integrated apps and traditional connected style desktop apps. So let's jump back to our slides real quickly here. What I'd like to get into is all the various rendering apps that we have available. And I've briefly shown you them, but many of these are names that you'll recognize, very familiar names in rendering, things like Keyshot and Maxwell Render. These are products that have been around a long time and, really can create a elaborate, complex renderings, and some rather easily. Right? So, long-time products, a lot of users are familiar with those two names in rendering, Keyshot and Maxwell Render. The others that I want to mention are Simlab Composer, another traditional installed application that allows you to connect to Onshape, but it has all kinds of very cool things, things like mechanical simulation, for example. So another is Clara IO. This is an integrated cloud app, a very easy to use rendering application. And I'm going to show you a little bit more detail on it in just a second. Reality Server, another integrated cloud app, one that runs right inside of Onshape. Another great, simple, easy to use rendering application. And finally, OneRender, another, again, integrated cloud application that's very easy to use. So we have a few of the industry standards, and we have a few of the new cloud-based applications that can really allow you to do some powerful things quickly. So these are some of the options that are available. I would like to take a moment to go through each of these and just briefly mention them. The first is Keyshot, and I think for a lot of render users out there, Keyshot is definitely one of the biggest. It's one of the standards, so to speak, in rendering, and it's a traditional desktop installed application. It runs on Windows and Mac, but the big thing is you can connect directly to your Onshape documents from within Keyshot. And the reason I bring this up is, in Keyshot, you can go File, Connect, and it will connect to Onshape as if it were a local folder on your local drive. And of course, you get all the benefits of modeling in Onshape, but it allows you easy access inside of your traditional, Keyshot environment. Now, I do have a very simple example to show you. This is a trial version, as I mentioned before. Keyshot offers a free 14-day trial, so keep in mind if you wanted to check that out, you can, and you don't have to pay anything, again, much like many of the apps here. But I wanted to point this out only to point out how a connected desktop app works. So this is a traditional installed application I can connect to Onshape, and it connects directly to my Onshape account. I can then pull in any part or assembly that I want. Okay. So just keep in mind, this is a traditional installed application that, as if I were going File, Open, I can browse to my Onshape documents. Okay. So very easy to use and a good example of a traditional desktop installed application. What I'd like to get into is, another example of these connected desktop apps. And many of them function in a similar fashion. You can go File, Open, Browse, and select your documents from within on an Onshape interface. So it's a very easy thing to do. Another example of this is Maxwell. Maxwell is another installed render application, another one that's been around a long time. It has a lot of loyal users, and it's definitely, again, one of the industry standards when we talk about rendering. And these are, Keyshot and Maxwell are definitely some of the more complicated rendering options, but they give you the most flexibility and the most control. So Maxwell, Keyshot, both traditional installed applications. They both allow you to connect to your Onshape documents. So they allow you to browse Onshape documents as if they were a folder on your local drive and place them directly within Maxwell Render. Now, unlike Keyshot, the Maxwell Render app also runs on Linux, so you have runs, on Windows, Mac, and if you're a Linux user, works on that as well. So it does have the ability to run on many different platforms, but it is an installed traditional application in that sense. And you can use the Onshape connection tool to connect to directly your Onshape documents. So Maxwell Render, another very good render option if you have the time, if you want to, looking for one of those more, robust, a lot of options, very complex, potentially. You have a lot of things that you can do with one of these apps. Now, the next one on my list is Simlab Composer, and this is again another installed traditional desktop application. The neat thing about this is, of course, it gives you render options, so it has the render capabilities built into it that allows you to easily import your geometry and then apply different materials to it and render. It runs on Windows and Mac. It has an additional option for dynamic simulation, and this is, you can think of this as moving mechanisms. Those types of motion, you can simulate those things in Simlab Composer. Now, just keep in mind, it's a combination of render app and potentially a dynamic simulation if you choose to go for that. But it's another installed application, and it works very similarly to Keyshot and Maxwell Render in the sense that you're browsing to your Onshape documents. Okay. So these are our list of more traditional installed applications. Now, all of them have some kind of a free trial or option, but you'll need to download, install, and then browse to your Onshape document list. So it's a more of a traditional type workflow. And I think for a lot of users, if that's what you're looking for, maybe you've heard a lot about Keyshot, or you've heard a lot about Maxwell Render, you're really set on using that, but you want an easy way to connect to Onshape, you have it, right? We have those as apps in the App Store. Now, these are the more traditional apps. The apps that I'd like to get into next have a ton of benefits, and that is integrated cloud apps. And the first one I want to show you is Clara IO, and it's a integrated cloud app, meaning it runs right inside of Onshape. This means that it's another tab in your document. This means that you never have to worry about local files, updates, installs, everything, all the benefits that you'd get with an Onshape document, right? So you have the mobility, you can access it from anywhere. You don't have to worry about license fees or any of those types of things. It's free to use. It runs on any modern browser. So Windows, Mac, Linux, even Chromebooks, you can run renders on. So integrated cloud apps, they have a lot of big advantages. They're just another tab, so they maintain, they're there with the document. They're not in a separate place, so to speak. And they're very easy to use. So I can subscribe to an integrated cloud app, add it to a document, and be rendering within a minute or two. Again, so that instant deployment, I can try it out right now without much, headache. I don't have to fill out a bunch of information and download an app and install it and so on. So like all the integrated cloud apps, the next, this one and the next two that I'm going to show you, they all don't require an install. They all don't require, license fees or so on. They're very easy to use, so you can get started right away. Now, integrated cloud apps, they have a lot of big benefits. I think the biggest benefit is just using the cloud-based architecture. When we talk about rendering apps, they're a heavily multi-threaded operation, which means that you can use multiple cores. And we run into users all the time. They say, "I'm going to spend $10,000 to $20,000 on a render-specific computer," when you can use something like a cloud-based rendering app, crank up the amount of CPUs that you want, and run a complex render from a simple laptop. And you don't need to spend all the money on the hardware and software to get things going. So one of the biggest benefits to these integrated cloud apps is just using the cloud-based architecture, and the fact that we can scale up and down dynamically to get things done quicker, do more complexity. It all depends on what you're trying to accomplish. So that is one integrated cloud app. This is Clara IO. Very highly recommended, very, very easy to use. So if you're looking for one to get started, definitely one to check out. Now, the next one is Reality Server. Now, Reality Server is currently in beta, and it's free to use while in beta. It is a very powerful real-time rendering tool, and it is a very neat, another very simple to use rendering application. Definitely a highly recommended one. It's a very powerful real-time rendering tool. It's built right into Onshape itself, and again, It couldn't be easier to use. So much like Clara IO, very simple, easy to use for the beginner. And again, you'll notice from the screenshots here, it's integrated right into Onshape. So it's just another tab you can jump between parts studios and assemblies, and you're rendering very easily.
Yeah, Cody, excuse me. I just add that product's in beta right now too. So just realize it's fully functional, but they are kind of in the middle of their beta, so that's why it's free for now. So
Yeah.
take advantage of it while it's in beta.
Absolutely. And it's a great rendering app. It's free to use while in beta. So as Joe mentioned, you have a free rendering tool available to you now. You can try it out today. So definitely check these out. Clara IO is the same thing. It's a free to use app. Reality Server is currently in beta, but again, you'll see that soon become a full-fledged product. So that's Reality Server. The last one on my list is OneRender. And OneRender, again, is another integrated cloud app. And it's got a lot of really neat features. It's another very easy to use example. And the neat thing about OneRender is it's very well integrated. You'll see it's integrated with Onshape billing. It's built right into Onshape's document. So there's a lot of big benefits to these integrated cloud apps, including the ability to integrate things like billing, make billing simple for you. So OneRender is a great example of an integrated cloud app that's very easy to use. It's just another tab in your document. It runs on any browser. Again, all the benefits of integrated cloud apps, and makes it very easy to render something that you've generated or created, I should say, in Onshape. So what I'd like to do is walk you through a simple example of this. And I see quite a few questions there, and it looks like Joe's doing a good job of keeping up. But one that I want to point out there is what makes cloud-based ones different? I don't know, Joe, if you want to jump in here, but I have a few.
Why don't you do the poll too? I think we forgot to do that, which would be good to do.
I'm sorry. So now that we've gone through the various apps, let's do a quick poll of the audience. So bear with me. We've discussed all the various app types and so on. So I just get a feel for how much experience, if any, that everyone here has with the App Store. So just bear with me for a
I'll
second
answer your
here.
question, Cody, but let's do but I don't want to I want to do these first before I answer.
Okay. So I've launched the first poll. Have you subscribed to an integrated cloud app? So if you would, just bear with me for a moment, answer the poll. We're going to jump right back into the webinar in just a bit, but just trying to get a feel for how much of the audience has used the App Store, and in particular, integrated cloud apps. So I'll give you just a moment to answer that, and I'm going to close that poll, and I have one more for you. Okay, I'm going to close this one down. I have one more poll. So for those that have used integrated cloud apps, please select one of the following. Do they only run on Windows? Do they require you to download and install, to pay before you use them? Do they require high-end workstations, or none of the above?
Good, I stumped everybody on this one.
All right, everyone, I think that is enough. Let's close that one.
So, it was a loaded question on that last one, but the reason why I thought of that poll is it kind of answers the question of why, what's the difference? I mean, I think it's not clear. The integrated cloud app's got a couple things that it's new. I mean, you really have to try it. It's a single button. There's no install, so you just go to the App Store, you hit subscribe, and you're now using the product. There are no extra steps, so it's ridiculously easy just to, you're not doing the licensing and the download, the install, or all that kind of thing. They run, especially on a task like this, when we're talking about rendering requires a lot of resources, right? You could use your CPU or GPU, but it can really tax your local system. But when you're using an integrated cloud app, all that calculation is being done on a different computer. So what you'll see, I'm sure Cody will show when he gives an example of one of these, but you're going to see that you could use my favorite, I'm a broken record, but my Chromebook. I use my $200 Chromebook, and I do the image that you're looking at up there is one that I created on my Chromebook, right? And it was calculated and on a battery, and my battery lasted forever because my CPU is not cranking away. And wherever I go, whenever I log into Onshape, I can go to my relative's house and use their computer because I forgot to bring my computer. And not only do you have access to Onshape, but you have access to all your integrated cloud apps are also there and available because they run on all the different platforms as well. So I mean, there's a lot of advantages, but think of it like an iPhone. I mean, last thing I'll say is we really wanted this to be as simple as using an app on the iPhone. You just, the first thing you do when you get, or Android, what do? You go to the store, you get an app, and you try it out. And that's exactly the scenario here. So it's much different than I think we're used to dealing with in the MCAD world. The apps are a whole different animal now.
Yeah, and it's a good point to make that you can really just try stuff and then decide which one you like and buy that one. And then that is, I think what Joe's referring to there is it's a different philosophy than a lot of users are familiar with. They've been using CAD for the last 10 years. It's a very complicated trial process if there is any, and oftentimes you have to shell out thousands of dollars to get access to these kinds of applications. So it's really democratizing not just CAD and, of course, Onshape, but also all the things that you might want to do with your CAD models. So what I'd like to do next is walk you through an example of using one of these simple integrated cloud apps. And so what I'd like to do is, of course, show you how to subscribe and use a simple application. Now, I have a few apps that I've already subscribed to. And so when I jump into an app, for example, you'll see I can subscribe to it. I can confirm. Let's go ahead and confirm. And now I have this option to subscribe. So any integrated cloud app like this, whether it's Clara IO or one of our CAM applications or so on, you have this option when you go into the app to subscribe to it. Now, you get the app details, and I've already mentioned much of this, but to actually use an application, you must subscribe. And in the case of an integrated cloud app, you must subscribe to it. You'll click subscribe. It will take you to a bit, an information, essentially confirmation of what you're adding. You select get for free. You confirm with your password. All right. So let's go ahead and enter my password. If I could type, give me. And now I've added that app. Right. So it's really that simple. You enter your Onshape password. It then adds it as an app available to you in your documents. And so you'll get a little visual pop up here just indicating here's how you launch an app. So once you've added it, right, I'll click close. Now when you go back to any document, you should see under add application the applications that you've added. Here's Clara IO and a whole list of other apps that I'm currently subscribed to. Okay, so just keep in mind, adding an application, subscribing to it's very simple. You go to the App Store, you click subscribe, it'll ask you to confirm with your password, and then you'll have it in your list of apps.
Yeah, and Cody, every computer you log into, those apps are with you. That's really one of the real unique things here. So you always have access to those as well.
And that's a really good point. So if this computer blows up today, I can jump on another PC and keep right on working. I can go to the public library, log in, and generate a render. I don't have to worry about installing, and it goes with me wherever I am, wherever I log in. So the One Render app is the one I want to walk you through. Very simple one. Now, all of the integrated render apps are very simple and easy to use. So if you haven't checked them out already, I would definitely recommend it. I'm going to walk you through a simple example of One Render. Now, One Render is a very easy to use application. As I mentioned before, it's integrated. So if I click One Render, you'll see in the Add application, it launches a new tab. So as I mentioned before, you access integrated apps directly inside of Onshape. This is not the different UI. I'm still in the browser. I just have a new tab in my Onshape document. Now, in this case, it's asking me, well, what do you want to add to One Render? What do you want to render? And you can choose a Part Studio or Assembly. I'm going to choose my main Assembly here. And then it launches the One Render interface. Okay, so again, very easy to get that data in and start rendering. I'm just jumping over to a different tab, essentially. Now, there's three pieces to generating a simple example render with One Render. And of course, there are many options to it, so I don't want to oversimplify. But just to get you started, there are three key things I think that the new user would need to be aware of. The first is scenarios. So if you're looking for a background, a scene, so to speak, you can do that with scenarios. I can select scenarios, and you'll see a pop-out or a fly-out menu gives me options for choosing a scenario. Now, in my case, we have this nice garage workshop that kind of makes sense with my worm gear housing. So I'll double click that. Okay? That will load that scenario. And you'll see it takes my worm gear assembly, places it on top of the desk, and then I can set the other things that are important to me. Now, scenarios, generally the first step, at least when I go through and create my renders, I'd create a scenario first, then define my materials. Now, by default, it pulls in the same appearance data that we have in the Onshape document, but you can specify different material specs, for example. So I can select a part, define a material, and give it a glossy or transparent look to it. So you can go in and define different material specs. You can do it on a per part level. I can select the individual parts and then set those on the pane on the right. So very easy to specify material looks as you for your final render. Then, of course, as you zoom in or out, you'll see a frame here that indicates the actual rendered image, the frame for the rendered image. Now, the last thing that I want to point out, the last real important step to generating a render is, of course, defining the actual camera. And this is the last step in the process that I really want to point out. You'll see a little icon here for cameras. You click Cameras, click Add a Camera, and now you have something that you can render. And all it's doing is it's grabbing this angle, this, the orientation that I'm looking at it now, and gives me an option to render that. I have a few different things that I can do. I could rotate the model around, for example, and create another camera if I wanted to. Maybe I want to look at it from a few different perspectives. But that's really it. If I'm ready to render and I don't have any other details that I want to apply, I can just click the render button. So again, I've gone from not even having a rendering application to adding it to a tab, bringing my document in, and ready to render in a matter of a few minutes. And again, all free to use. In this case, very easy to use as well. I click render. It starts a simple preview render. And this is one of the neat things to point out as we're doing this. It's just generating, again, it's grabbing that information from Onshape, generating a simple render to give you an idea of how much time this is going to take and how much resources this is going to take. And what by resources, I mean, render points in the case of one render. But again, keep in mind, all the various render apps have their own payment methods. Some will charge you per render and so on. Go ahead.
And all this is, if you were to show your CPU, it's zero, right? I mean, this is all the calculations are being done on a more powerful, high-end. Who knows? It's one of the nice things is you're not taxing your local system right now.
Yeah, and I'm going to show you this in a second, but I can kick off a render, jump into another tab, and keep working. And that's something that if you're familiar with traditional installed applications, is a very difficult thing. You generally don't have enough computing resources to do other work while rendering. That's why oftentimes you'll have dedicated machines to that purpose. So it's a different philosophy, of course, but it's a very powerful one, especially if you find yourself doing a lot of renders, right? So here it's generated a simple render preview. And the idea behind this is give you an idea of how long it's going to take and how many points you'll use. Now, the points are how we, in this case, one render charges for render. And you get a certain number up front, free to start, but then you can use more or buy more as you choose to. Go ahead, Joe.
And each app, so this has already come up. So, and as an example, you get 50 points per month for free with one render. So you could use up to 50 points to do renders, and that's a fully functional product. And then you decide if you need to purchase more. So even on the trials for apps, even on free apps, they give you quite a bit of capability actually.
Yeah, and as Joe mentioned, each app has its own line where they want payment, but the big thing is you have an option to do something for free, to give it a shot for free without having to spend a lot of money up front. And you can see, 50 points per month. I'm using 3 here, so that's quite a bit. Now this is a simple, low quality render, but the neat thing about this is you can say, okay, start the render, and I can give it a rough idea of what it's going to look like. And if I like it, then maybe I can crank up quality settings or resolution settings. Now, one of my favorite settings here is I can crank this up to Pro, for example, and I can crank this up to Full HD. And if you have an upgraded account, you can even crank this up to 16 CPUs. Right, and I can take something that would be a 60-minute render and do it in 4 with 16 CPUs, and so I can generate a complex, detailed rendering from a Chromebook in 4 minutes using a 16-core server. And that's something that just you really couldn't do. This is something that would have been dedicated to, high-end machines, very expensive dedicated workstations. So you can, go up and down on how many resources you want to use. You can set any quality settings you want to use, and that's really all there is to it. Once you're done, you hit the big Start Render button. Right. So for the sake of time, I'm just going to keep this low quality. We'll hit Start Render, and that's really it. It goes through the process of requesting a render. It then runs through and renders it. And as Joe mentioned before, I'm not taxing the local machine. So there's no load on my local CPU. I can jump over to another tab if I choose to, right? So I can go over here and take a look at the assembly, continue working, and it does not impact my rendered tab. So go ahead, Joe.
I was just going to say, show them in the App Store, just if you wanted to buy purchase points. I know you probably covered it, but just to make the point, if you wanted more, and you said the whole last thing I'm going to talk about the store is that on one render, like so you say you want more points, you simply pick one of those buttons, and there's nothing else to do. We've made that process streamlined, so you can very easily get more points without having to go into PayPal or some other mechanism to do that.
So that's really, all there is to it. In this simple example, I have less than a minute left on my real low quality render. I have a few examples that I've run at the higher quality settings that, of course, look a lot more detailed, but take a bit more time. So in my case, I did a few renders that were roughly 45 minutes or so in time using a single core, cheap machine, so to speak, the cheapest option I could. But you still get some great renders, and I think that's the point Joe was trying to make. With one render, even the free option, you can do quite a bit with. So if I jump tabs, here's a simple finished example. I made the case transparent with the cutaway section view of the assembly. So that's a good, simple example of a final render. I have a few others here. This is a little bit lower quality example. Here's another one where the entire case was made transparent. So just trying to point out a few different examples, and these are all done in roughly 30 to 45 minutes on the cheapest setting in one render. And go ahead.
Oh, you can hear my breathing, huh? I was just going to answer a few questions, so you tell me when you want me to chime in.
Go for it.
All right, so there's a bunch of questions, so let me rattle through a few of these. One was about security, and I think this is a really good topic, is security and using these apps. So each partner, when they sign up in the App Store, has to agree to policies. So we don't get into details, but we agree in essence that you are sharing your information with them, so you have to realize that. And they each have their own terms and conditions that you can read in their App Store entry. So I would encourage you to read them and see if they meet your criteria. But keep in mind that even with, say, one render, they're not getting the actual Onshape model. They are getting the graphics, and really what they store is the bitmap of it. So I'm not saying that doesn't share your intellectual property, but you're not sharing your entire design with the application. Typically with these applications, you're sharing a very small subset of certain things that you're sharing. But read the terms and conditions, and you can determine for yourself if they work for you. There was another excellent question about if you're a free Onshape user, and if we didn't point this out, I should have put this in the questions actually. You guys do not have to be a pro Onshape user to use any app in the App Store. So you can easily be a free Onshape user and still buy one of our partner applications and be a pro partner app for that matter, or whatever. Use them all for free, but they do not require you to have a pro account to use an app. So doesn't matter to us. It's just you realize that free versus pro is really about your privacy. How much privacy do you want in Onshape? The brand, the one render brand, does not stay on your render. Someone was asking about that. So no, you can render, of course, without the actual one render brand on your render. That would be possible. And then, Cody, I don't know if you see some more. I'm just running through.
No, I think you hit a lot of them.
Yeah, wood comes up a lot. I answered one in there, and I see another furniture maker about wood. And, I would say that, listen, we can't go through, this was asked, I saw a few of you were asking me, can you point out the differences between each product? And I can't do that for a variety of reasons. For one thing, I'd probably be incorrect. I mean, each one has its strengths. You know, each one does some things differently. We obviously focused on the integrated cloud apps today because that I think is something that I saw most of you haven't tried them. I mean, I think we hit the majority of you have not tried an integrated cloud app. You should have already tried it while we're in this webinar. You could have already tried it and rendered something while we were sitting here. So you should try them. And each product has an advantage. Like, as an example, Keyshot. If you guys haven't used Keyshot, excellent product. It's rock solid. You get awesome looking images out of it. And one of the things they do that is special is that they will, if you make changes in the Onshape model, they will update in Keyshot. So you want that level of associativity, you get that. Clara IO, it's really simple. I mean, and I know that Cody said simple, we said simple, but it's even simpler than one. You know, we made one render had several steps, and Clara IO you can really go for pick it, hit it, and just get you can share your actual render with others because they share within a 3D model. So I don't know. Each product's got a little bit too much that it does, that it's different than others, and it'd be very hard for us to do it justice. So you'll have to kind of check that stuff out for yourself.
One question that's come up is, can an imported assembly be rendered using the render apps in Onshape? And that does not make a difference. So whether it's created in Onshape or imported into Onshape, you can use the render apps on it. So another question that's come up.
We should say animations came up too. Keep in mind we didn't show. You might even want to hit that. Well, you don't have the button. There it is. Sorry. So each product actually there's a whole variety of animations that are available. One render has camera animation that does a really slick job of doing it. Keyshot does an excellent job of animations. Clara IO is really an animator. It's more of your traditional keyframe animation. So Clara IO will take it into, if you open it up in the Clara IO editor, you have equivalent to Maya essentially with your Onshape data. So it goes really deep. So Simlabs, they do mechanism. So you can do your mechanism you can do your mechanism motion studies and get an animation out of it. Let's see. There's a forum. I would encourage you to look at the Onshape forums too. There's a question about whether or not there's a forum for Onshape apps and all that. And there is a dedicated discussion group discussion group that you can put in questions. And what I do with the partners is whenever I see a partner get a question, I typically, if they're not reading it, I will inform them that there's a question. So you can usually get an answer from a particular partner and those responsible for it in real time or very close to it.
One question that's come up is, how does the output handled? And you can output as a PNG file. That was a question that came up. So once I'm done with my render, I can then download, of course, as a PNG. There's also the EXR format in there as an option as well.
All right, Wood, sorry. All right, so someone asked Wood. I don't know what I said. I've probably been babbling. So if you want Wood, I think that the 3 products that I would go to, Maxwell does excellent job of Wood. I mean, and Keyshot, excellent job at Wood. One Render has excellent wood materials as well, and I think I would just say you can try all 3 of those and make your determination. They could each sell their value to you separately, I suppose. The point is you got choice, right? So.
Yeah, and I think that's a big theme for the App Store in general, is you're not locked to a specific application. We're allowing you to try many different applications, find the one that works best for you, and then use that one. And then as we mentioned, almost all of these, or all of these in this example, have some kind of a free trial that you can try today. Some of them you have to download and install, like a traditional application, but some like One Render, like I've done here, you could literally create a render. You could go from nothing but a CAD model to a fully rendered model in a few minutes. No installs, updates, or any of those types of things. So definitely worth checking out if you haven't already. Just quickly to kind of recap here, jumping back into my slides real quickly. We started off with Keyshot, and I showed you a simple example of it. It's a great example of one of the more detailed, long-term. It's been around a long time. Great rendering app. Maxwell, same category of application. These are both, considered industry standards for rendering. Both are traditional installed apps. Both connect to your Onshape documents very easily. Simlab Composer, very similar thing, connects to your Onshape documents, runs on Windows and Mac, also has options for dynamic simulation. But then the integrated cloud apps, the apps that take just a few clicks to start using. Clara IO, another very easy to use, as Joe mentioned, rendering app built right into Onshape as a tab. Reality Server, free to use while in beta, another very simple to use real-time rendering tool built right into Onshape. And of course, I've shown you a simple example of OneRender. So just quickly recapping these different render tools, all of these are available to you today. Whether you want to use a free trial, you want to just get started with something like a Clara.io or OneRender and create a simple render to get going, all of them are freely available in the App Store. So definitely take a moment, take some time to try these apps out. And that's really what I had planned. I want to say thank you everyone for coming. We're going to stick around and answer any questions, so bear with us. We know there are a few left there today, so just stick around if you have any outstanding questions. But that's it, everyone. Thank you, and have a good day.